A wise old owl sat in an oak. The more he saw, the less he spoke. The less he spoke, the more he heard. So let's be like that wise old bird. Now, back when Jesus was alive, he had walked around the Roman countrysides preaching of love and peace and forgiveness, but he also preached of faith in one true God. Jesus is God. Not many gods like most Romans believed in, but one God. Now, many people came to hear his words and were comforted by these words because he said that God loved them. God would forgive them when they made mistakes, and that brought peace to many people's hearts. Now, 12 men came to join Jesus. They were called the 12 disciples, and they followed him wherever he went. And eventually they began to preach the words of God as well. After Jesus had died, they continued on around the Roman countryside preaching the words of Jesus' one God. Now, most of the early Christian followers were poor people. They were slaves. They were the sick people of the Roman world. And that's because these people were people who suffered. And the people who were preaching about this one God would say that God loves you no matter what, no matter if you are a slave, no matter if you are sick, no matter if you made a mistake. And they said the one God would forgive them. And so they thought that this was good. They also knew that no matter what, they would, if they believed in him, they would go to heaven after they died. And so even the suffering that they were experiencing didn't seem quite so bad. And many of them began to have peace in their hearts. And so they would listen to the words that these men would preach about this one God. Now, the people who believed in this really believed in this. They did not worship any other gods, and they tried to bring other people into these ideas, and they were very fierce in their faith. They believed very fully. Now, these were dangerous ideas that some of the Roman leaders were hearing, especially if you were an emperor who thought you were a god and these people would not worship you. And so these early Christians were persecuted. That means that they were said that they could not continue doing this and they would be punished if they were caught. And so these early Christians had secret meetings, and they would meet on Sundays, and they would find obscure little out-of-the-way places in Rome or in the countryside to listen to these words preached by these men and join together. Now, they also had a secret symbol that would let people know that they were Christian, and that was the symbol of a fish. So they would draw that symbol in the ground or on a building, on their house, and then people would know that they could, if they were also Christian, then they could be friends. So that was their secret symbol. Now, throughout this time, from the time of Jesus' birth to death and on, as people continued preaching about these words, there were many Roman emperors, And these emperors were good and they were bad, just as they had been in the past. Some brought prosperity and some brought division to Rome. Many of them were soldiers, and Rome was growing a little bit more. Their borders expanded. Some of those soldier emperors would go out and fight, but there was a lot of division, and sometimes, since it's so big, they would have two emperors at a time, an emperor of the east and an emperor of the west. But a lot of times then those people would fight each other, and many of the emperors were assassinated during their reign. So there was a lot of division and confusion and not a lot of cohesion where everybody was working together for a greater good. Now, eventually, there were a pair of emperors named Constantinius and Galerius. Now, Constantinius, he ruled the western part of Rome. His base was over in Gaul, and Galerius, he was ruling the eastern part of Rome. Now, Galerius had somebody under him, and that was Constantinius' son, Constantine. And Constantine stayed with Galerius, and he fought on his side as a military person. But one day, his father, Constantinius, requested that Constantine come and live with him. And Galerius did not want that to happen because he felt that when he had his son with him, that he would be able to have power over Constantinius, that he could always threaten to hurt his son if Constantinius tried to take over all of Rome for himself. So he hesitated, he came up with excuses, and he wouldn't let Constantine go. In fact, he put some guards on Constantine to watch him at all times. Now, Constantine didn't like this. He wanted to go and see his father, and so he waited and he waited. And one night, the guards that were watching him had fallen asleep, and he immediately grabbed a horse and took off. Now, he was on the far eastern side of the empire, which was near Turkey, and he had to get all the way to the far side of Gaul. So it's a long, long journey by horse. And he only was able to grab a small bag of supplies. So along the way, he had to forage for food, he had to sleep in harsh conditions, and he had to go as fast as he could because he knew that Galerius would send men after him, and they did. But since Constantine had ridden for 2 days straight, right away, those men never caught up to him. And after a long and harsh journey, Constantine did make it to Gaul and to his father, Constantinius. Now, shortly after Constantine arrived, Constantinius died. Constantine was glad he was able to see his father before that happened, but he was very saddened by this. Now, all of the military troops in that area had loved Constantinius, and they had grown to love Constantine as well in the short time they knew him, and so they raised him up to be the new emperor of the West. Now, Galerius didn't like this. Constantine hated Galerius, and so Constantine decides he is going to take his army over to the east and try to conquer Galerius and then be the sole emperor of Rome. So he gathers up his troops, everybody who's very happy to follow him, and they march off to the east. Now, during this time, there was another man named Maxentius, and he thought maybe he could grab power in Rome, and so he went right to the capital city of Rome, and he put himself there and started raising troops, saying that he was now an emperor of Rome. Well, Constantine goes, and he finds Galerius. They have a battle, and he captures Galerius. And Galerius, he was an older man, and he could not imagine not having this power anymore, and so he committed suicide. Now, Constantine was the ruler of both the West and the East, but he still had to deal with a problem in Rome. So he gathered up all of his troops, and he marched back to Italy. He had to march over the Alps and down into the Italian peninsula. Now, just outside of Rome, Constantine meets Maxentius's troops, and they have a small battle, and they push Maxentius's troops up against the Tiber River, and they are stuck there. Now, they break battle for the day, and Constantine goes to one of the hills and looks over the battlefield for the next day. And over the river, he sees this blazing sign that he's never seen before. It was the sign of Jesus, and there was a voice that said, "Put this sign on your men's shields tomorrow. Fight under my sign, and you will win this battle." And then this blazing sign goes away. The sign was the sign of Chi, which in the Greek times was an X, and it had a straight line with a curl on top through it. Now, Constantine does not believe in this one God, but seeing this sign, he is a follower of signs, so he thought, why not? So he puts these signs on all of his men's shields, and he makes a standard that will be at the front of the battlefield tomorrow, and the next day they set up, and all of these shields and this standard all have Jesus' symbol. And they begin their fight, and Constantine says, for Rome and for this Christian God. So they fight, and Constantine surrounds Maxentius's troops, and eventually they are pushed into the river or captured, and Constantine wins. So Constantine comes into Rome, the new emperor, the sole emperor of Rome, and he has fought under this Christian sign, this Christian God. And that is the end of our story for today. You'll find out more tomorrow.